Alrighty. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. It's 4 o'clock, so I will make a start. For those of you who I don't know yet, I'm Anna Claire Harper. I chair the Cambridge University Land Society's Residential Forum. I'm also the co-founder of Green Resi, which is a software business using data to unlock existing UK residential properties for institutional investors with a mission to bring 10,000 vacant homes back into use by 2030. And I've written 3 books on residential investing and host the Return Property and Investment podcast. So I get to talk to industry leaders, including some of the experts that we have speaking today about most important real estate topics. So through my work and my content, I spent quite a lot of time working with and also benefiting from property data. And I still feel like I know only a tiny, tiny fraction, which is why I'm especially looking forward to today's discussion. Before we dive in, just a really quick word on who we are as an organisation. The Cambridge University Land Society gives over 1,000 members now opportunities to learn and connect with one another and with the University of Cambridge's departments of land economy and architecture. And the Residential Forum is one of its specialist groups. It's led by academics, commentators, and industry leaders. We run 3 events each year, typically, usually in person. So today's online session is a pretty rare opportunity for us to connect with a global audience. And for those of you who are able to join us for in-person events, our next event will be on the next generation of UK housing, held at Savills in London on the 4th of November. So come and join us if you can. And if you'd like to hear more about the Residential Forum or CULS, just feel free to speak to me or Franz or Emma, who can all answer any questions, and you should be able to reach us in the chat. So it just remains for me to thank our speakers very much for joining us from across the world. And thank you so much, Franz and Emma, for organising such a brilliant lineup and topic. And now I'm going to hand over to Franz to introduce our speakers and share some amazing insights and slides. So over to you, Franz. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Franz Fuerst, Professor of Real Estate and Urban Economics here at the University of Cambridge. And I think I'm the only academic, full-time academic at least, here at on the panel. We're talking about a lot of things today in an hour, lots of ground to cover, decarbonization, but also proptech. So 2 of the hottest trends at the moment and been around for years. Yeah, so I'd just like to welcome our fantastic speakers and panelists today. In no particular order, Emma Fletcher, she's Low Carbon Homes Director at Octopus Energy, where she leads high impact housing initiatives that are focused on improving energy performance through innovative clean energy solutions. Emma is also a Cambridge University graduate from our department. And she's also a qualified rural surveyor, and she pioneered the UK's first fossil fuel district heating homework in her own village, but she's also groundbreaking in lots of big projects. And the one to mention here at the moment that is really hot is the Zero Bills Home initiative. And Emma is a rare breed in the sense that she knows the top level stuff, the high impact stuff, but also the grassroots of it, I think. And that's the contribution, I think, that I'm also hoping Emma will bring to the panel. Then next, going in clockwise order, we have Gavriel Merkado. He's the founder and CEO of Realyse, one of the UK's leading real estate data analytics platforms that transforms how professionals make investment decisions and integrates over 100 data sources and counting, probably, through sophisticated algorithms. Gavriel has a background in quantitative finance, and he's really brought advanced data analytics with his team from the hedge fund world into the property sector, empowering developers and investors to leverage big data for smarter and tech-enabled decisions in housing markets while reducing traditional appraisal times by an impressive 90%. So then our next panelist is Matt Ellis. He's the founder and CEO of Measurabl, the world's most widely adopted ESG data platform for the real estate industry, which has become a giant in the world of proptech, measuring over and tracking the performance of over 10 billion square feet of property across 80 countries, so truly global. But Matt's based in the US. Before founding Measurabl, Matt led the sustainability initiatives at CBRE. And under his stewardship, Measurabl now helps property owners measure, manage, and report ESG data to drive decarbonization initiatives and access sustainable finance opportunities. So welcome, Matt, and glad to have you here. And then last but by no means least, Raja Setamaran. He's the co-founder and CEO of PropStack, India's leading real estate technology and data platform, bringing over 2 decades of experience in the property sector. Raja is a member of the Forbes Real Estate Council and has really been a driving force in using digital data solutions to boost market efficiency and transparency. And his mission, and I know he's very passionate about it, very successful also, is to modernize how India's property market operates through innovative technology and analytics, laying the groundwork for smarter and more sustainable housing decisions, and also commercial real estate, importantly, I should add, while increasing market transparency. So not a small agenda, and we all only have 24 hours a day to pursue that. But yeah, glad to have these wonderful panelists there sharing our insights. So, needless to say, we have a global audience and a global outlook on this. We're grappling a little bit with different time zones, but coming all together now, as we can see. And yeah, maybe I'll just kick off by setting the scenes with just a few slides before we open it up to the panel discussion, and just to give a little bit of background. And we titled this webinar a bit tongue-in-cheek, saying, well, we had fun with the alliterations, as you can tell, but especially the desirable, dangerous, and distracting. So I would just like to show a little bit of background on that. So first of all, and this is starting from where I'm based in the UK, where are we with regard to decarbonization of the building sector? So it's no big secret that the building sector must do more to pull its weight in terms of decarbonization. So overall, looking at this slide, which is from several sources, CBRE, but also underlying data from other sources. So overall, we can see, and that's the dark green line, that we're more or less on target of meeting our obligations in terms of going net zero by 2050. But when we look at especially the residential sector, which is the blue line, it's been pretty much flatlining since the 1990s. Same is true with for transport. To a lesser extent, there have been some changes and cuts in carbon emissions. So it's really the building sector. And transport obviously also related to the built environment, but especially the residential sector has barely made a dent into carbon emissions. So where most of the cuts are coming from in carbon emissions and improvements is really from the energy sector. So the greening of the grid. But the building sector itself and real estate hasn't really done that much, at least not in the UK. I'd be interested to hear also what our other speakers have to say about the background in the countries that they are monitoring and providing data on. So this was the kind of the general overview, but it goes further than that. So even if you break it down into a bit more of a fine-grained categorization, as it's done here by the International Energy Agency, you can see that where most of the where most of the emissions cuts need to take place is in that yellow bar, buildings and energy use. They need to make the biggest cuts. So who can come to the rescue of that languishing and lagging residential and general real estate sector? Well, proptech has been earmarked as one of them, because as the old adage goes, you can't manage what you can't measure. So a proptech can play a big role in transforming the built environment. And it's looking very promising in that it will actually get the traction, or already has the traction and the trajectory to fulfill this role and step into these big shoes. And here's just one among many graphs that you will see, and they all have slightly different numbers, but this is from Precedence Research in terms of how the proptech market has developed in terms of size and the projection up until 2034. And it seems like sky's the limit there. So just comparing the earliest figures from 23, 24 to what's projected is quite impressive. Always to be taken, forecasts are always taken to be taken with a grain of salt, obviously, but that's most projections actually have similar growth paths. So, which brings us to the global scope of today's webinar and also of the task. Obviously, decarbonization being a global task, even in a world like today, where it looks a bit like we're going in reverse with a bit of deglobalization. But where are actually the big proptech business hotspots in general? And this map shows very clearly where they are. Some of it is pure size of countries, obviously, but not just. So as you would expect, a lot of it is happening in North America and Western Europe, but then India also stands out in particular, and also maybe surprising compared to China. So if you think that all the action is in China, as it is in a lot of industries, not so with proptech, at least according to this source, where India is clearly the leader in that respect. So also hoping that Raja maybe can tell us a little bit more about that. And I'd like to kind of compare and contrast that to climate change performance in various countries. And obviously, this is a moving target that changes from year to year, how different countries perform. A lot of red there, which means a lot of low performance. But again, what stands out here is, well, the UK got a very favorable ranking. The US, not so much. But India, again, is, at least in the Asian context, but also globally, ranked as one of the leaders in terms of climate change performance. So again, has a very good combination of proptech, dynamism, and also ambition in terms of decarbonization. So that's interesting, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to also talk about this. So just briefly to maybe take a bit of a contrarian view. So first of all, and that's where we come to the distracting and dangerous side of things, what I'd like to tease out a little bit with the panel today is whether more data also always means, or mostly means, better decisions and better outcomes. So there are quite a few surveys that have, or data that is available that shows that we really have a long way to go in real estate to improve the data. So 40% of data are bad in a way, so inaccurate, incomplete, inconsistent, or outdated, according to a survey by FMI Autodesk. And this leads again to 41%, and this is what the survey respondents said, of bad decisions that are based on simply bad data. And then they put a number on it, and they estimated that 1.56 trillion euros in this case are lost due to bad data or bad information that could be better. So that's one kind of staggering number, and yeah, be that as it may, but even if the data is ambiguous, it can also lead to overconfidence in decision making. And we have a long line of studies in behavioral finance, behavioral economics that have demonstrated this very convincingly, that in the absence of data, there is uncertainty, and wherever there is uncertainty, people are inclined to proceed with caution. But if they have data and they believe in the data, they might, yeah, make decisions thinking that they have the right data, but due to the aforementioned problems with inaccurate data, data that's just wrong, that can lead to overconfidence where it's not appropriate. And then lastly, even where you have excellent data, it can lead to decision paralysis. So analysis paralysis, as it's sometimes called. So too much data. The paradox of choice is kind of a term that's been bandied around a lot, but really has, I think, its justification in a lot of realms in life, where you have a lot of data, but unless you actually have the tools to analyze it and to see the signal through the noise, just data can actually be counterproductive and lead to not just decisions that are suboptimal, but maybe no decisions at all, because people, well, there are studies that show that if you present more and more data, then people who already had made up their minds, now they're no longer sure about it because data is ambiguous, right? So the pros and cons, and always more pros and cons, can lead to this kind of paralysis. So just finishing off here, which then leads on to, shall we actually use these metrics as targets? And we need to, if we really want to have an impact and reach net zero and land this net zero plane in 2050 or whenever, if possible earlier. So there are two laws that are very well known. Goodhart's law, which says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And closely related to that, Campbell's law, that says the more any quantitative social indicator, or also economic and financial indicator, is used for decision making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures. So the higher the stakes get in terms of using something as a metric that really financial decisions depend on, the more of an incentive there will be to game the system, right? If nothing depends on a particular metric, then nobody cares, and people have well, they will probably be really honest about it. Whereas if more or less your economic survival depends on it, there is just more pressure on it to game the system, either with outright cheating or with kind of gray zone tactics to optimize certain processes. So those are kind of the two caveats that I would like to throw into the mix before we start off. So I will stop sharing my slides here and just go straight into the panel discussion, and maybe start off with the desirable part of it and asking what, relatively broad question, what roles do you see for ESG data platforms, or any kind of decarbonization data and their role in going net zero? And maybe if we start from North America, the way the globe spins, or the other way around, I should say, with Matt.
Sure, Franz. Yeah, a pleasure to be here with you guys today, and thanks for the questions and the chance to offer some thoughts on it. I think we probably want to just start with the idea that I think, gotten presented here by the professor, right? Which is that we know that data is the right place to originate our decisions from. We're going to have a debate about whether that data is good or less good. So I think we can all agree that better data is the goal, but we need to be realistic about this. There is no such thing as perfect data. Decisions are always complex and based on imperfect information. So I think what we need to do as an industry is make sure we get to a place where we have sufficiently good, not letting great be the enemy of good, I think that's been a bit of a false aspiration, that we're always sitting here looking for something that's exactly right at the exact moment in time. And that's just not going to be the case, I'm sorry to say. We're going to have to make decisions in business and in sustainability with the best we can get today. Otherwise, we end up where you suggested, analysis paralysis, right? So I think my first kind of comment on this issue of decision-making data and sustainability, and what's working for us, is I think the consensus that we want to have some data, we want to have the best possible, but I don't want us to operate under the pretense that great is, or perfect is achievable. I think the second thing is some definitions around that would really help. And the sustainability business for the last 20 years, we focused on performance. Things like scorecards, rankings, ratings, relative measures. Problem that we actually had all along was that we didn't understand whether or not any of that was based on a consistent definition of those measures. So what I'm referring to here is things like energy intensity in buildings, for example, or carbon emissions. But we would find out that when we actually look at the statistic, that most of the information underlying it was missing or incomplete. Again, we don't need perfect, but we do need some consistent baseline of what is an acceptable measure. And I was shocked to find out that the industry hadn't spent a lot of time there. We hadn't wandered around and actually come out and said a definition of an acceptable meter reading for utility bill that was reportable is 11 out of the last 12 months, for example. We didn't define timeliness of that data. So there's actually a big gap in the industry that sits beneath our performance objectives and ambitions. And it's based on a lack of consensus, not on what we want to measure or where we might want to go, but rather the definitions of those measures themselves, if that makes sense. I'm happy to talk a bit more about it, but Franz, I hope that helps a little bit. And if I didn't answer your question directly, go ahead and ask it again, and I'll try another way around.
That's perfect. So maybe I can bring in Emma next especially also on the metrics and the definitions, or whether we have the right metrics or whether we do know by now what the metrics are, but I can't agree on a proper definition, especially when it comes to decarbonization in the housing sector.
I think the real problem is the government policy that sits on top of all of these definitions. If decisions keep being changed the whole time, it's very hard to then work out what goal you're trying to achieve. Almost like if you're changing the answer the whole time, the exam question has to change, or the definition has to change to keep up with the exam question. I'm sat here in Scotland today. They've been told they're going to have some reforms, but that's all they know. So everybody's on tenterhooks, like, what might they be? So it's like you fire the pistol, but nobody knows how long they're running in a race, where they're running to, and what they've actually got to do to train to win the race. And I think that's a real difficulty under all of the definitions that are out there in the market at the moment. There is no clear clarity on what everybody means from sustainability, what they mean from carbon targets, for measurement, all those other things. And for house builders in particular, it actually gives them a fairly clear position to say that they're not changing their current position. Your point exactly on your graph, why the building and built environment hasn't really changed its position, is because they say, well, we still don't know what the answer is, what you want us to do. So we're going to carry on doing what we're doing, i.e., in my experience, installing homes with gas, because we don't know what we should be doing to change. No one wants to have the mini disc player moment where they invest in technology that's out of date within 2 years. Full disclosure, my brother-in-laws did buy the mini disc player, but I don't know many people who did. So that's the real issue we have, is that we need some really clear international standards that people know what they are hitting and that stick. And I think that, for me, is the clarity that we need in order to achieve it.
Franz, if I might, and Emma, I
Sure.
think it's a really good point. It's one that, the complexity of standards and frameworks, right, is a morass. But I actually, coming at this, I think there's something I still know about America. And one thing was supposed to be a fairly capitalist economy. And I would like us to make sure we look back to not policy and regulation, but rather the investor incentive and the yield and the return. for our goals and targets, like the real estate business is debt and equity. You give me debt, you give me equity, I put it into a building and I return to you some result economically. That should work, regardless of whatever the governments have to say about it or a particular target. But I think we have a really big problem that that's not actually working that great either. The investors are, and I think this is where I very much agree, like the investors are not aligned what outcomes they want to see. The lenders aren't sure how to measure physical climate risk exposure and adjust an insurance premium as a result. So I think we have some like real, before we worry about the regulators, let's worry about capitalism and markets. And the markets aren't really using sustainability data very well, and they're not sure how to incentivize or penalize as a result.
Yeah. Is there any value in doing what I've done to my building? That's a question I'm asked all the time. And it's something I do think that the RICS, my RICS hat on, needs to grapple with. How do you value sustainability on buildings? Easier in commercial with green leases and ESG-driven tenants. Really difficult in residential to work out what the value is.
Yeah. But to me, proptech is also about the promise to cut through this, jungle of regulations, changing, making U-turns all the time, and actually demonstrating the business case. That is kind of the basis of, you could say, a good investment is a good investment regardless of what additional regulatory requirements come on top of it that might kind of provide the tide that lifts the boats, so to speak. But at the very base, there needs to be a solid business case, and proptech can help demonstrate this. So I'd like to bring in maybe Gavriel. Is that also your experience that maybe there is even an effect that you need more data and good data in a kind of slightly more challenging environment that we're finding ourselves in at the moment?
Sure. Well, we always like more data.
We do,
I
yes.
thought Matt's point was really interesting, coming back to the kind of the economics of it. And I was just thinking, this is like an externality problem from economics, right? Where we're building things, we're operating things, that's the primary economic objective. But there's this unintended externality going on the environmental side. And how do we actually monitor and measure that? And then you've got this whole complexity of the life cycle of a building, starting off at producing concrete and cables, through to assembly, through to the operation of that building, through to eventually the disassembly of a building at some point in the future. And yeah, perfection is not going to be possible to be able to measure all of those different variable factors and say, like, this building has this much imbued carbon, this much operational carbon, this is how much we can improve the efficiency across 10 different metrics. But just some pretty good, solid standards to, the other points that have been raised, I think would be super helpful. And then data, you start pulling data from everywhere. You can start finding all kinds of interesting relationships across the board to be able to better understand buildings and the built environment. And actually, a little thing that popped up in my mind was I think on one of your graphs, on one of your slides, where it showed the kind of decline, I believe it was in carbon emissions, and it had residential, and I think it was transportation along the bottom. I think it was nominal figures. And I started trying to think, well, what is that in per capita terms? And does that actually imply that there has been, on a per capita basis, an overall improvement or marginal improvement in efficiency?
Yeah, I think so, and that's a good point. If it's measured on a per capita basis, but you could argue all day long about what matters in terms of the actual impact. Is it total emissions, or should it be corrected for things like population growth, right? So yeah, the jury's still out there on that one, but yeah, very good points. Raja, what's your perspective on this, especially this kind of interplay between regulation, fast evolving, but markets growing very fast, and you're dealing with some of the fastest growing markets on the planet in India, Middle East, and other countries. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. So I have multiple points to make to what Emma said, and specifically what Matt mentioned. So in terms of having a single regulation across countries, that's going to be absolutely tough because just to measure, what constitutes a green building or a well building and the certification part of it, it changes from country to country. But I would imagine that as soon as any of your assets or your buildings gets institutionalized, then it's all about the ROI. And we did that study, Franz, you were a part of it, where it was very clear from facts that the green buildings are in demand by the tenants and long-term institutional investors. And we're talking about investors like Brookfield and Blackstone. They're embracing it in India, right? And for multiple reasons, because they're long-term investors, they're seeing the value improve over a period of time, and the tenants have started to demand that kind of space. There is a preferential shift towards a green building versus a non-green building. And then we come to the point where because in India, building industry contributes about 25% to greenhouse emissions and about 35% to the overall energy consumption, right? So the government and the regulators have to step in to increase the percentage of green and efficient buildings. So they are incentivizing in multiple ways. They're easing the regulations, they're easing the policies, they're easing the funding, and even the allotted permissions. And we may know that IFC have started this edge building concept, right, where they're financing green buildings across the world. And recently, one of the most prominent REITs in India got a significant financing because they actually implemented all the ESG norms in the manner that was required for the financing. So I think, this is a long drawn out game. I think there is a broad macro and a micro part, and you got to take one step at a time. But in my view, sooner than later, I think the adoption is going to be more as we move along for these concepts. It's going to be a grind, but I think people are going to adopt it, better than what they're doing right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Roger, and also for providing the desirable parts, because we're still in that part of the discussion, although we've already touched upon some of the more challenging, distracting, or dangerous, you could say, dimensions of it. But can I just come back maybe to a more practical question? So I think some of our participants today are also interested in it. From an investor's perspective, be it a REIT or also maybe just a regular household, how can they benefit from proptech? How can decarbonization metrics and data help and be embedded? And maybe I can ask each of you to provide an example of how a particular data product or metric is embedded then into a tangible project on the ground. So maybe again, starting with Emma.
I mean, well, certainly Octopus is a data company. That's exactly how we've disrupted the UK energy market. That's how we're disrupting other energy markets around the world. It's based on a database called Kraken, which is now licensed by other utilities. And the use of flexibility, the ability to use solar batteries and air source heat pumps to eradicate energy bills. And who wouldn't want a zero energy bill on their home, right? So, we see this as the future, the ability to flex a house in order that the resident doesn't pay for 10 years. And you'd say, well, that's great. That's a UK thing, but we're now rolling that across the world, New Zealand, Japan, Germany, France, Spain, potentially Italy as well. So, and the US. So we know that we can deliver this globally, but it does rely on having every half an hour data and making decisions through our platform as to when to buy power, when to sell it, when to store it, when to use it. But you can do that on a micro scale of a house or a macro scale for a whole energy system.
Well, just out of curiosity, have you ever tried to sum it up to like a number in terms of carbon emissions saved from better data and the intelligence? That's probably quite a lot, but I know you're too busy to do these, to draw the line and do the sums already, because
there are some very clever people with Octopus. I'm sure they can, but the aim of the game is to electrify and literally take that journey, as you were showing earlier, and literally electrify the building world in order to bring it into line with global ambitions to decarbonize. So, you know, that is our sole focus, is making the proposition economically beneficial to the customer, but also doing the right thing in parallel.
Right. Gavriel, do you have an example of where data really made a tangible difference from your
Yeah,
own?
absolutely. So look, we got, you know, thousands of different data sets, and we've built valuation and forecasting systems, including energy efficiency information and energy usage information, and actually have managed to prove and demonstrate that if you improve now the energy efficiency of properties, you actually get a value uplift, which people are now actioning. So people are taking that information and recognizing, okay, you know, this property is inefficient, is built in an old way, or has the wrong kind of energy infrastructure in it. By changing it, improving its efficiency, there's profit to be had. And so people are now using it and doing it, which is pretty cool to be able to see that.
Yeah. And is that mainly a one-off thing in terms of getting it done retrofit, or is it like an ongoing kind of reiterative process that you also keep monitoring after that?
It's reiterative. That's a really good question. Yeah. Yeah, it's iterative. So, you know, it starts off with either an existing asset or a proposed asset, and then looks at the value changes there. But then you can track that over time as well and benchmark it against other assets.
And I suppose that's also attractive from a business perspective to have like a long-term contract rather than a one-off product that you deliver. And then
that does help.
Yeah. Matt, do you have any examples of?
I love this question. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I was kind of picking up on the capital markets, the capitalist instinct, and the good old economics of the real estate business. I'll stay with that theme when we talk about data and ways that it's practically applied. So the theory of change that we have, and many have, is that we would want to help adjust the risk reward profile of real assets and investing. And if we could use sustainability to do that, then the markets would work better, more efficient market hypothesis, and drive sustainable market transformation. So we needed data to rebalance the equation. One way that we have gone about that I am most excited about today is, instead of working at the asset level and CapEx or OpEx areas, we've started to work at the investment level, the entity level, and the market level. And what I'd love for you guys all to take a look at is what we've done with FTSE Russell, the stock index provider, where we provide a small set of very specific data points on individual assets that we then aggregate up to the REIT level for publicly traded REITs, that are then used to construct a green version of the traditional FTSE EPRA NAREIT index offering. That index, by the way, is tracked by about $330 billion of institutional capital that want to invest in REITs. The green version, so far a little bit less than 10 billion, but it's a start. So what we've done now is create a way for billions of dollars to find greener, relatively greener assets, and use the market mechanism for that transaction, that trade. Our responsibility is to provide accurate investment grade, timely data to support those market transactions. So I do think, while we can talk a lot about OpEx, CapEx, and asset level, which is where sustainability is substantially spent its time and energy, I think we really can use the data in exciting ways around lending and around stock and equities investing, around bond securitization. So we can make billions of dollars of transformation and do that every day, every second, versus the hold period of an individual building over many years.
Raja, does that align with your experience in the markets that you're active in? You have similar products at the index level or down to, well, very disaggregate data that I know that you have. So.
We're still some time away, from that playing out in India. At least we're seeing some early signs, but it's far from, being more mature. But coming to the point as to, what's been happening in a broader scale on the ESG front is, especially post-COVID, we've seen a lot of IoT tools coming into the market where, they are actually measuring AQI, energy consumption for HVAC, and so on and so forth, right? And there is a move from the large institutional investors who are looking at a long-term play where they're willing to actually invest that money for dividends that would pay out over the period of their holding, right, in the asset. And I think that's a good sign. Whether that trend will continue is anybody's guess, because what's starting to happen is, you have two sets of properties in any market. The new properties, which can be retrofitted in a manner which can be ESG compliant right from day one, construction onwards, and then the older properties, which have to be retrofitted. So we're seeing a great deal of resistance from the landlords and the investors of the older properties to reinvest to make it ESG compliant. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's the trend that we're seeing in India, at least.
Yeah. So can I just pick up on what you just said about IoT, Internet of Things, and air quality, measuring air quality? I'd like to get a view of the panelists. Are we moving away from data being mainly kind of numbers software and relating it more to actual hardware and agents and actual management of a property and the data actually taking action, so that a tighter link is between just having information and numbers and actually acting on that information and taking more or less out the human, sometimes very slow element out of this that digests the data, then gets maybe decision paralysis, all these other things, and cutting out that middleman between data and actual action in the built environment, be it at the facilities management level, but also at the investment level. And we're crossing over into fintech, obviously there, and but lots of opportunity there, especially with AI. So I don't know who wants to go first.
Franz, if I could take a quick shot at it. I mean, I just think it depends on what the use case is. We operate a business in real-time data management, facilities controls, and one of the use cases is demand response. At least in North American markets, we have this phenomena that time that you use energy is more or less expensive. And if you can manage your demand during those times, you can save and even make money. So it's a very specific use case. You want to use data and you need to act fast. You do that, at least the way that we do that, is an automated fashion. You don't have a manual decision there. You simply set up the conditions for you and your business, and then our technology can manage that demand up and down based on grid requirements. That's a very operational, tactical, day-to-day requirement that has some carbon benefits too, by the way. You go to a very different use case, like I was describing with stock exchanges. You don't need systems level high fidelity data there, right? The data that we provide for stock exchanges is certification status, physical climate risk exposure, energy intensity on an asset level, then aggregated up, calendarized over about a several month period. You wouldn't make a operational decision in a building based on that data, but you can make an investment decision based on it. So I hope that helps a little bit. As you have a really large set of use cases and opportunities to apply very different types of data or frequencies of data to get a benefit.
Yeah. Anyone else comment on this?
I thought the statement you made around moving from software to hardware, which is interesting in that, bringing together the base of IoT into the built environment more and more, it becomes more essential for there to be hardware within buildings to understand what's going on or outside of buildings as well, understanding noise pollution, air pollution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then as well, yes, decision paralysis, when you have all of these different data feeds at different time scales and different quantities, sitting there and being overwhelmed. It sounds like the guys at Octopus maybe have a solution there to bring some of that information together. But having some kind of automated decision-making system that can factor this all together in real time is a really interesting concept, I think. And there's probably people already working on that way ahead of where I'm thinking.
To be honest, that's exactly where our zero bills is at, is at a household scale. Everybody's too busy to worry about all these things. Yes, there are people who want to do it, but if you want to stay up 24/7 and think about every half an hour what your house needs to do, well, crack on, carry on. And that can be applied from a domestic scale house to a bigger network or even microgrid kind of scenario, utilizing you know, our platform effectively. But in talking to a lot of people, though, it's actually what data do you want? Because as soon as you go measure something, sometimes you don't actually want to know the answer. And it's so who are you measuring the data for? And we have that conflict a lot when talking to people, especially landlords versus tenants, the tenants on the whole being our customers, but the landlords being maybe the ones doing the monitoring of the property. So, you know, do you want to know how bad the air quality is in the building from a landlord's perspective? Because then you're going to have to go and take some action, right, if it proves wrong. And I think that's the real issue, is what's the data for, who you were collecting it for, what are the potential benefits, what are the pitfalls coming out the other end. And I think increasingly we're going to see a very different variation in terms of depending on who's gathering the data, what it's for. So if it's the tenant wanting the data, they'll probably be happy to have that monitored. Whereas actually if it's the landlord, you know, wanting to monitor all these different things, it may be that the tenant doesn't want the data. I'll give a prime example. Talking to a tech company yesterday, they have a really cool device that can turn off lights and things in student accommodation. It sits in the room, and it can monitor activity in the room. So it puts the heating on and the heating off. Do you want to know as a student that you're having a party of 10 people in the room? Because this equipment will pick that up, right? That's maybe not what you want, that you know that you're having a party. You know, indirectly, this data could be quite unhelpful if you're the student in the room, but it could be great if you're the landlord. And I think that applies across the board, right? It's who's gathering the data, who's signed off that it's okay to gather the data, and how's it going to be used for you, and how's it going to be used against you.
Yeah, and listening to what you're all saying, would it be fair to say that we're almost about to come full circle in this in this data journey? That in the beginning we more or less had a black box, right, where we had those green building labels, and either you had a label or you didn't have a label, and there wasn't really a lot of drilling down going on, and you just had to take leads or whatever the Briam's word for it. And then the second generation was really opening up that black box and really drilling down to the material metrics and making it available, not just to chosen few, for lack of a better word, but to everyone who wanted to know, and becoming more and more transparent, and having as much data as you desire, or maybe even more. But then maybe going back to the black box, but leaving the black box open. And I'm not sure if that's an apt metaphor for those who can actually use it, but black box in the sense that I don't need to know all the underlying metrics, but I have like an agent that's taking immediate action. So in the survey that I mentioned, I think the majority, almost 2/3 of respondents, said they'd be happy for a quote unquote robot to take a decision of them. Not that kind of haphazardly, they still want to set the criteria, but in that sense, not looking at staring at all the numbers, but actually having more and more of that going back into that black box with the ability, obviously, to eyeball the data if and when it's needed. Would that be a fair characterization, or would you see it differently?
I think time is money. You know, people are leading busy lives. If it takes stress out of your life, and financially it also makes your life better, I think people are willing to do that trade. You know, dare I say it, data for good. It improves the situation and just takes things away that are possibly in the art of the too complicated, and that also potentially joins up technologies together, so you don't have to think or do that. but it does draw the line in terms of cybersecurity, who could get control, all those other things, bigger questions potentially.
I'm gonna make my comment really quickly before I have to move, thanks to being in a museum for this presentation. I posted in the chat a book that I wrote where there is at least one chapter that's somewhat readable. And the chapter is on this, this move from static methodologies saying that there is such a thing, which is this is a myth, that there is this green building or not green building. That doesn't exist. They're all on some spectrum. Our job is to measure their relative location on that spectrum. And we use data to do that, not a label. Also, I think the thing that I would call out about certifications, which I am a fan of historically, but not on a go-forward basis, is that they are opinions. They're methodologies of defining green. But there are many opinions. The opinion that ultimately matters between buyer and seller, lessee and landlord. Those are the opinions that I think we should elevate in this conversation. And I don't think we need to have some third party say that that building over that one's green, but the building that didn't bother to pay the certifier the fee is not. I just think there's a lot of oddities in that environment that we should probably look to the data to get past. I hope that makes some sense. I'll try to find a quieter spot now.
Gavriel?
I think what more I can add to that one, Franz. It's an interesting one when you talked about, you know, having a black box and opening it up. I thought it's computationally quite difficult, but maybe I'm overthinking it in terms of the specifics of how you would go about doing it. And then also when you start thinking about, you know, things that Emma raised of the you know, privacy of 10 students having a party and not wanting somebody to actually know about it and where the limits are. I'm not sure I can add that much more to it, actually, Franz, on that one.
Roger, do you have a perspective on that, especially in fast-growing markets also? I'd imagine it's, yeah.
So, you know, I just want to take a step back and say, you know, what does this constitute to get all of this together? You know, in terms of hardware, software, ideally, all of us would like to have one dashboard where the data from all the hardware is getting pulled and you can see all the data on a single screen, right? And you're monitoring it, creating efficiencies around it, and, you know, creating capital. You know, you're increasing the value of the building or the asset. But within the building, and I'm taking the example of a commercial building, you have the landlord whose interests are not necessarily aligned completely with the tenant. That's one thing which we need to cross over. The second part are data privacy issues. The tenant may not want to share their data, their part of the data, with the landlord. So there are so many aspects to this, right? So while on one hand, everybody may be appreciating the benefits of going green, having good air quality within the building, decarbonization, so on and so forth, but it just, you know, needs to be aligned at all levels with the different players in the ecosystem for it to be a perfect match, right? And then the regulators also tend to come into play in all of our, you know, economies. So I think for us to implement it in the most ideal manner, I think it'll have to be one small step at a time till we reach a stage where we're crossing, you know, all of these points, and it's helping all the players in the ecosystem in some way or the other.
Thanks, Roger. I think Anna wants to come in.
I didn't know if you'd seen the questions in the chat box, so I thought I might just, shall I read them out for you? Or have you seen
yes, if you don't mind, thanks.
Yeah, so there's one from Sarah Basmera. I hope I'm saying your name right, Sarah. To what extent is operational footprint considered, particularly when it comes to furniture and interiors? Are the tools able to measure the footprint of renovations? And what does a decarbonised furniture industry look like by 2050? Does anyone have any insight on that one?
That is interesting. I don't have an exact answer. I know that we've worked with some furniture companies and, you know, understanding value differences between furnished and unfurnished properties. And I think that's a really interesting question. You know, we're talking about the things, but not necessarily the contents of the buildings. And maybe we should be factoring that in to the conversation.
Thanks.
Presumably there's similar conversations going on with, I'm thinking of IKEA because that's just such a big brand, but there must be other big companies out there of how they go about the same process.
Yeah, before I give Emma a chance to respond, to all the participants, please feel free to write your questions in the chat. I should have mentioned this at the start.
I mean, IKEA definitely is one of those people that are actually leading the way forward. You can take back your furniture, you can swap it over, they'll look at it and improve it and put it out back into the marketplace again. So definitely, yes, IKEA are doing that. But actually, you can take a look to maybe some of the European markets. In Italy, for example, you don't have a fixed kitchen. You actually buy your kitchen in sections and you move your kitchen with you when you move around from property to property. So I think there are some things that are going to change over time, that actually people might have more movable furniture that they can then take with them, literally not quite the kitchen sink, but it means that, you invest in a kitchen and it moves with you. So there's definitely good examples out there. But on the whole, every single house in the UK for definite is a different size, a different shape, has different staircases. And whether you like it or not, unless it's completely flat pack, is unlikely to fit in every scenario that you've got at home. So I do think that is definitely something for the future in terms of consideration.
As I think the way that I took Sarah's question was about embodied carbon. And it's an entire discipline with meaningful regulation behind it and standards and definitions. So if you're, typically what we've been talking about is operating buildings, an existing building and its go forward life cycle, but there's the whole pre-construction design development and then the refurbishment, which I think is what you're asking after. And I would refer you to like EC3, which is a North American consortium of technology companies actually, but Skanska is part of that. And there's a whole database of EPDs. I forget what that stands for now. And it's just basically the carbon specifications embodying that. This applies to things like cement and otherwise. Thank you. So there's multiple startups in this space.
Sorry, I think I might be interrupted. Franz, there's another question from Phil, and I don't know if you've seen that. I'll read that one out.
Oh, you could read it out, please.
Sorry, read it out. Yeah, thanks
yes,
for
please.
such an interesting presentation. This is from Phil. Thanks for such an interesting presentation. Can any of the panelists share any case studies in countries with a single utility provider that does not yet have the hardware for 30-minute data, where the goal is to capture the savings made at the household level for other household costs like food or healthcare by partnering with financial institutions? And as far as I'm aware, that's the only other question we've got. So we've got a few minutes to
tackle that one.
Most of our utilities are this way, I'm sorry to say. So we have thousands of utilities across the states, and many of them are not even online. Let's just start there, let alone able to provide interval data, 15, 30-minute or otherwise. The typical methods, of course, are then to sub-meter that asset and install hardware to retrieve more granular time series data that you can then really act on. And I think the question was about, are there more public or private partnerships there, and kind of how do you go about that? Say it's an entire industry. I mean, back in the 70s, the United States, we began being concerned about commodity prices in real estate and the rise of energy services companies, ESCOs. And they would come in and provide this kit and then work with you on an energy savings basis. That model's still alive today. So yes, there's many examples of this.
And actually, Matt, you raised a really good point. Sorry, and I saw you get your hand up, but a really good point. Social equality. If you cannot get any form of Wi-Fi or mobile connectivity, it is excluding people, some of the lowest income people, out from the ability to get benefit from this data. Actually physically gathering the data and actioning it. And that is a massive problem that we're seeing in social housing.
Yeah, adding to the challenges. Before we conclude our webinar, and I'm conscious of time, we actually only have a minute or two left. I would like to get just go around the panel and ask everyone about an outlook, and ask the slightly provocative question: do you think proptech and ESG, both of them, will still be around in 5 years' time? Or will they just dissolve into mainstream? You may have seen some publications coming out of academia saying ESG should actually, there should be an end to ESG. It should just be normal mainstream. It should be mainstream practice. The same may be a mirror image of that on the proptech side, where you can see a trend of it dissolving into fintech and insurtech in general, as all these different trends integrate? Or would you say there is and there will always be a distinct space for both proptech and ESG? So
Franz, can I suggest that we do this in 10 seconds or less, quick
10
fire?
seconds or less. Okay, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so quick take. Who wants to take it? Maybe no. We don't have time for everyone. Okay,
I can take that.
You're unmuted. Yeah.
yeah, Roger.
Sorry, go on.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think they're going to be around in some form or the other. It may not be proptech, could be RE tech, CRE tech, or something else. ESG could be in a different form, but I think they're going to be around 10 years from now or 5 years from now.
Okay.
What's-
Gavriel, what's your...
Yeah, likewise, I think inevitably they will be around for sure, but I think different naming, maybe the historic hype of proptech will be renamed something else, as Raja's just said, RE tech, etc. And ESG is obviously going through a bit of a reformation at the moment as people are trying to figure out, as we've been discussing, where the future lies.
Matt?
I think the data points will exist. I think they're part of the business case. No, I don't think we'll use the same jargon for it. And that those data points will always have to be delivered using technology. The scale is otherwise unachievable. So there'll be technology for it and there'll be data points, but the whole framework terminology, yeah, that's going to go away.
Yeah, and very quickly, tech is tech, but as I say, being a different guise, I'm sure, even just within a year. And answering the last question in the chat very quickly, interestingly, there is now insurance for retrofit. So I've been talking to a broker today, so you can get landlord's insurance for retrofit to make sure that the value of the works actually produces the outcomes that you hope to see. And it's the first time I'd ever heard of it. So there we go.
Excellent. And I think that brings us to the end of this webinar. Can I just thank all our fantastic panelists for the amazing contributions they made, and Anna and Emma for helping to organize this and putting all this together, including the technology. Also Mong-Chi, who's worked behind the scenes to make all this happening. Yeah, and also to all our participants. And yeah, there were a few technical hiccups, though hopefully not too many. We apologize for them, but yeah. Great
Don't tell anyone, Franz.
from all over the world. So thanks so much. And
Thank you so much, Franz.
bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.